and I'm going to get to that in a minute, right? You don't want your ranch to burn down. But if nothing else, and I'm getting ahead of myself, if a fire comes and you're like, we need to evacuate quickly and right now, in the back of your mind, it's like, okay, we have this insurance in place. We're not going to be completely out. So that's a good financial decision. By the way, that won't really help you from a safety standpoint. It may help you make that decision to leave early. You're like, hey, the ranch is insured. We've updated our coverage recently. We know we can get the livestock indemnity program from USDA. We've checked on our barns and sheds, fences. We've talked with our insurance agent. By the way, this of course isn't insurance, but it's a program that you can apply for to get money to cover your lost livestock. But the idea is, if you thought about insurance, it may help you to make a better decision instead of like, hey, I have no insurance, I haven't thought about this, I can lose all these things, I'll have nothing, so I'm going to stay here and fight this fire. So this is just the idea of if you have insurance in place, it may help you make a better rational decision when a fire does show up. Another thing to think about, medications and pets. When you're like, okay, the house is insured, a fire showed up, and you don't have, you still don't have any time in this case. You wake up in the middle of the night, it's a firestorm, you weren't prepared for it, but you have thought, I need my medications, and if I have time, I'm going to grab my pets. Those are sort of two things that if you're forced to evacuate for any period of time, certainly that one may be one that you would want to have, and sooner than later. And oftentimes people, when they do lose their homes, that's something they sort of remorseful about is, I didn't get my dog or cat or whatever it may be. So, two things you may think about. Important documents, those can all be replaced. If you have a safe or a legal professional or something in the cloud or a safe deposit box, tax returns, wills, trusts, it just can make life easier if your home happens to burn. So again, the idea of being prepared for that. Another thing people really remiss when their homes burn down is loss of photos. So in the old days, it was all hard copies, so it takes quite a bit of work, but you can scan some of those or all those, whatever it may be. Scan those old hard copies, get them in electronic form, right? You want to keep them in two places, so maybe they're at your home on the hard drive, but if you have them in the cloud, or maybe a safe deposit box on a jump drive, or whatever that may be, a disk. Nothing's forever, right? But these are sort of some things to think about in terms of, again, when we interview people that have lost their homes, like, man, I wish I had some pictures, right? Everything else I can replace. It's a drag, but pictures, pets would be two things that people wish they would have had before they ran out of the house. And this is another important one. So here's Corona right here. Escape routes. Again, you're living on the ranch. You probably know all the roads, but maybe your family doesn't. Or maybe you don't know all the roads. So again, here's Corona. Today you probably came out on this road here, headed north. And but I took this example here. If you didn't know any better, right, you'd say, oh, here's a one way in and one way out. So oftentimes we have southwest winds, right, so the blowing fire in the northeast direction. So fire starts here, and you're like, wow, I'm stuck here. But thanks to sort of Google Earth, right, if we zoom in a little more, sure enough, there's a road here. Then maybe it's your neighbor's road. Maybe I can go on this power line easement and get escape. So the idea is to use the resources at your disposal to find out, multiple exits from whatever ranch you live on. Because oftentimes, that one route may be blocked. And maybe it's not the fire, again, maybe it's the power line. So use that resource, understand your environment so that, when these fires hit, again, maybe at nighttime, it's smoky, you get disoriented, and like, how do I get me or my family or that horse trailer I'm towing, what's another way to escape from our ranch? Again, this is a picture taken in the daytime, but it gets very hectic. There's a lot to think about. It's hard to see. Do you drive with your lights on? People have been killed because someone's driving fast. They're in a state of panic and they just didn't see him coming. So, one way to think about that, right? A fire shows up. You're like, great. The ranch is insured. Documents, photos are backed up. It's like I can make better decisions. Grab my meds, the pets. I know where my escape route is, and I can go. All right. So that would be one approach to a wildfire. And so we'll talk more here in a minute about not necessarily staying, but how to make your ranch. If you do get stuck on the ranch, how to make it less prone to burning down. Of course, you can't, smoke is kind of the equalizer. You may reduce the flame, the chance that your ranch is going to burn, or the ranch house is going to burn up, but there's really nothing you can do about smoke. So, again, if you take some of these steps into account, sometimes leaving early is your best choice. All right, so let's kind of shift to maybe more specific to the ranch, things you can do and might want to think about that are unique, again, to the ranch, but you won't find, say, in the city, kind of like haystack. So this slide is probably in the wrong spot, but we'll go ahead and in this video, we'll do it anyways. I don't know where this is, but somewhere in California, obviously all these people are escaping. This is kind of a fortunate situation. You see all these trees burning. But what I want you to watch is there's an ember from this fire here somewhere, and quite frankly, in really dry conditions, an ember can come from up to a mile away. And sometimes you hear in the news or read in the newspaper, we had spotting up to a mile. In other words, you're at your ranch, and it's like, oh, the fire's a mile away, and all of a sudden, you turn around and your shrub's on fire. Like, how did that happen? That's what we'll call a firebrand. When it's really dry and windy, in fact, a red flag warning is usually those conditions when humidity, RH, is in the single digits, fuel moisture is already dry, and that ember can land up to a mile away and start a fire. So watch right over here. It's pretty crazy. You see a truck, bombing off the road here in a minute. I don't know what he's doing, but there's two spot fires show up, and you can see how they start to grow. And this is kind of how, even in an urban environment, right, how a fire gets started. And then obviously this is a major potential on a ranch because we have fuel everywhere. So I'm quite sure these people are feeling that radiant heat coming off there. It's right there. So you can see right now, you could go out there and almost stomp it out, or your garden hose would work right now. And this is just kind of a close-up of that spot fire. And people are pulling off the side of the road here. A fire truck's about ready to come. They're coming in. These guys are coming out. But all along, in the course of about 30 seconds, this thing is starting to burn. So, and here's another one. And both of these, by the time it's done, you can't really quite tell, but it's probably blowing, 25, 30 miles an hour. You can start to finally see. We can see some fire, actually some embers landing on this truck. And there in that one, there's about some 10, 12-foot flames. Start to reach over and ignite that house. So this is kind of how what you're dealing with when you're like, hey, I'm going to stay and deal with this fire, right? You're expecting this wall of flames to come, and you've mowed, and the flame's going to drop down. Well, and all of a sudden you turn around, and there's all these spot fires surrounding you. You're trapped. Things blow up, and it's a big mess. So unless you've been in that situation, that's something we don't exactly anticipate. All right, so barns are a classic one. I mean, on a short note, it's really hard to keep a barn from burning down. A lot of our barns look like this, right? We're just not going to invest a whole bunch of money in replacing that siding. We may do something with the roof, but the one thing you could certainly do, right? All this, so the term fire-wise, the WISE, W-I-S-E, stands for Will It Survive Embers? And that's really thinking about your home, kind of like we just talked about. We've seen a lot of these situations where homes burn up. It's like, well, the fire flame didn't get there. How did the home burn? Well, it's because these embers came in. And so, same thing, the ember may land on this grass, and that's going to carry the flames right up to that barn. So will it survive embers? That's kind of hard to get a home to survive embers. We'll talk more about that. But it's certainly not going to survive flames, right? So here's some ideas. Like a 10-foot no fuel zone around your barn. Maybe utilize concrete walkways or slabs or gravel, bare ground, metal roof and siding. Like maybe put a metal roof on that. Roofs are one of the Achilles heels of all buildings. Obviously, this barn is, not to mention inside it may be full of hay, right? But these things are really hard to protect. But one thing, it's not going to survive flames. So what you can do is, remove this fuel around that barn. That would be sort of the first thing to do. Another example where that fire is going to burn right up to that building, and it'll just the grass will be burning, and then the barn will be burning. You can sort of prevent or hope to reduce that chance by grazing, mowing, removing that fuel around around that barn. Okay, equipment's another one. We tend to, this is a pretty good example. At least all the fuel around these equipment has been mowed, right? And you can maintain that again with maybe with cows, the grazing, spraying, weed eater. But in this case, sometimes a lot of these equipment they're covered in oil and grease, and maybe a bunch of weeds or grass, whatever it may be, that's dried out, stuck in that somewhere on that piece of equipment. And think of it again, that ember is coming and landing on all that dry, all those tumbleweeds or whatever it may be, all that dried grass, and all of a sudden it's like, how did my tractor catch on fire? Now it's on fire, and then it's the same thing like we saw in the Santa Rosa situation. This tractor burns, and then that one, and this one, and this one. So, for me, I'd put that equipment, if possible, a little further apart. Maybe you stagger it, right? Sometimes we don't have that much space, but sometimes in a ranch we do. So, again, embers are really hard to deal with, but certainly, keeping the fuel mode down would be a good place to start. And haystacks, thinking back to the insurance, a lot of times if you get insurance on a haystack, they have some stipulations, right? It's the fine print on how that has to be arranged and how much they'll cover if it does burn down, because, again, once one starts burning, it's really hard to put it out, and it tends to go to the next. Again, we get this issue of firebrands, so you may have a hose around this thing, but, suddenly you turn around and somehow a firebrand landed on that stack and it's going. So real challenges on the ranch. Again, 30 to 100 feet apart. If you've got insurance on these, it's pretty well specified how, what you have to do if you want coverage on that haystack if it burns. Same idea though. Weed eat around, keep all the fuel away from it the best you can, so that at least, if you're welding and the flames start creeping over here, and there's no embers per se, that you can stomp that out or it just won't travel over there. Propane tanks. Sort of obvious, right? Again, that can be a major problem if those were to go up. Move them back 30 feet from structures, non-combustible zone around them. Fire breaks, this is an interesting YouTube video. This guy's driving his tractor around the fire, and he does a pretty good job, right? It's kind of moving this direction. It's kind of flanking here. The head fire's up ahead, but he drives around it and at least contains it. But again, it's sort of a double-edged sword, right? Like, you can stop the fire, but you're not going to stop the fire brands, right? So this may work in the short term, but if a fire brand jumps over it, then it's off to the races again. But at least around your ranch home, or some of the pastures that you're trying to protect, that'd be one way to, you can, well, to the next photo, right? If you're comfortable using prescribed fire, this can be a great tool, right? Fight fire with fire. Using a trail, a cattle trail, a road, a wet line, whatever it may be, to maybe in the spring you're going to burn off all that dead material, so that you're not going to be, once that's gone, at least until it grows, get more fuel there. That will be a pretty good way to reduce your risk. It may be a good idea to have a map, so if the fire department shows up, where are the gates, where are the fences, where's water that we can use, they can help you out. And if that's prepared ahead of time, you can hand it to those guys, maybe multiple copies. Maybe you need spare gate keys or combinations. Locations of fences and gates are really important. If those guys are coming on, they're going to want to know that information. So, and if they don't have it, they may say, you know what, we're not going on your ranch, we just have no idea what's going on, what the layout is. Whereas if you have that map, if you cleaned up some of your fuels, you're clearly prepared for it, they may be more willing and able to come on the ranch and help out. This is kind of grazing to reduce blazing. It's kind of a phrase that the folks in Hawaii came up with. They have lots of fine fuels and heavy fuel loads, and as you may know, there's pretty significant livestock industry there on the island. So you can actually use grazing to reduce some of those fuels around your home or structures, maybe some sort of rotational grazing. And sometimes on your ranch, consider, hey, especially around here, right, where the fires start? Near the railroad. So maybe there's a pasture there that in the springtime, I'm going to put more cows in there, reduce that fuel load, maybe closer to a highway. We have a lot of ranches that have state land in the middle, and sometimes there's access, to that, and people are getting on there and camping, that becomes an area where, has greater fire risk. Again, bear in mind, we're not necessarily like preventing fires, we're just changing the way fire behaves. Okay, livestock's another one where it's sort of a prioritization. Hopefully you've thought of all these other things so that if a fire comes, you're not worried, you've thought about these things ahead of time. And livestock's kind of the one I kind of put, it's difficult to deal with, right? Like how do I, if it's, one or two cows or some horses, you put them in the trailer and you go, again, you get your evacuation route. But if it's your entire herd or part of your herd, it becomes much more difficult to deal with. So ensuring proper registration and branding is going to be, for that livestock indemnity program, you're going to have to prove to the government that those cows were yours and how many there were. So most of you, this is probably, you have this anyways, but keeping that information handy, again, and if it burns down, that may further challenge you on getting that sort of insurance money or relief money from the USDA. Any sort of contingency plan if your forage is burned off. Another thing, we tragically lost some lives in Oklahoma, I think last year or the year before. Again, this idea of going into a pasture where the gates are closed and we're going to go cut that fence or open that gate. And you know better than I do, sometimes, right, getting livestock to do what you want them to do just doesn't happen. And sometimes they kind of freeze as a fire and they sort of stand there, like you're trying to herd them, go out the gate and they're just standing there, right? And all along you're just, becoming more exposed to that head fire. So the idea of going into an open pasture with lots of fuel and cutting the fence or opening the gate, that's a pretty can be a pretty precarious decision. So, I can't advise you on how to deal with that, but just know that that's sort of one of those watch out situations that can lead to trouble pretty quickly, right? All right, so that's pretty much it for the ranch. I'll just go through this next part pretty quickly about, making your home survivable. Again, will it survive embers? We know it won't survive flames. So here's your home, the propane tank, the firewood in the corner here. Obviously lots of fuel, a shake shingle roof, this deck that's raised, and firebrands get underneath there. This thing has pretty much no chance. Same idea, the fire department, if they come and it's only your one house, like, well, we're not gonna go in there. It's a narrow road. You hadn't cleaned up any of the fuel along that path or road, dirt road getting to your home. They're just not going to go in there. Whereas this situation, if you can you've done all these things: the roof, the propane tank, the firewood, enclosed underneath the deck, remove fuel from all these different zones. Right, that's much more of a survivable situation for your home and maybe for a fire crew. So last video here, this one lasts about 4 minutes. So I kind of like this one. It's put together by an extension gentleman that used to be in California, and he went to this research institute. And so what they did is they built this house in a giant sort of warehouse, and they built it with multiple different materials and situations, and then sprayed a bunch of embers on it. And we'll see all that. And you start to see where your home is most vulnerable. Again, this is all just embers. And I'll tell you right now, it's really difficult to make your home, will it survive embers? It's really hard. It takes a lot of time and money sometimes. If you have a concrete, cinder block house with no windows, great. That's not going to be very hard. Most of us don't have that. We have vents. So watch this video. I'll try to point some things out as it goes. But you can see the vulnerabilities and the challenges that, if you have your ranch house that you have to deal with. So you can see here, right, the shake shingle roof, then a Class A roof. They've put pine straw or pine needles up here on the roof. Here in a minute, you see this corner of the house. It starts to create a vortex and changes fire behavior. You can barely tell that's sort of a grayish color, and that's white. It's a cement siding, a cement base siding and it's a vinyl siding. There's two different gutters here. See, the gutters are full of pine needles. They come here in a minute and put a bunch of vegetation right up against the house. So again, we know your home won't survive flames, but you know, what about embers? So again, there's no flames that will hit this house directly. Here they're pouring all these wood chips into this, basically a burner. Talking about putting the mulch around the house as if, you know, in a ranch situation, right? We can think about it's right out this door right here. We have this vegetation growing right up, you know, to the edge of the of this building, of your home, of your bunkhouse, of your barn. Sort of talks about these 5 ember generators. If you you can Google this online, IBHS, and you'll find these. They do a whole bunch of stuff. They do another one where they turn on a whole bunch of fans and do a windstorm. It's pretty interesting. Anyway, so those are all the embers, right? And that's this is the point, right? Remember when we saw those videos of the guys driving through in both those videos, right? This is what we don't really think about, especially during the daytime. You can't see it. If you've ever gone camping, right, you see these embers, but in a firestorm, right, it's really dry. And it's really hundreds of thousands of embers. And you'll see this. Think of it as here in New Mexico, right? We've all been in a snowstorm where it's not accumulating very much, but the wind is just driving those snowflakes